What happens when a shy teenager with a voice so powerful it leaves an entire theater frozen steps onto Britain's Got Talent, and still loses to a dancing dog? It sounds impossible, but that's exactly what happened to Jonathan Antoine. Most people remember the viral audition that stunned millions. Far fewer know what came after. Behind the standing ovations was a life shaped by bullying, heartbreak, depression, and a journey of self-discovery that took years to unfold. By the end of this story, you'll see why coming second was never the biggest challenge Jonathan had to overcome. It was March 24, 2012. 17-year-old Jonathan Antoine walked onto the Britain's Got Talent stage beside his singing partner, 16-year-old Charlotte Giaconelli. Together they were simply known as Jonathan and Charlotte. Before they even sang a note, the judges looked doubtful. Jonathan was nervous, overweight, and dressed like any ordinary teenager. Simon Cowell couldn't hide his skepticism and made a comment suggesting things were about to get even worse. For Jonathan, who had spent years being judged by his appearance, it felt painfully familiar. But then everything changed in an instant. The first notes of "The Prayer" echoed through the theater, and the entire room fell silent. Simon's expression completely changed. Amanda Holden stared in disbelief. The audience erupted with applause before the song had even reached its first chorus. Jonathan's tenor voice carried a level of emotion and control that nobody expected from someone his age. By the time the performance ended, the judges were on their feet. Simon compared him to Luciano Pavarotti, one of the greatest tenors in history. Moments earlier he had doubted Jonathan. Now he was calling him one of the finest voices he had ever heard. But that incredible moment would soon lead to an unexpected twist. The audition exploded across the internet. Millions watched the performance. News outlets around the world shared the story of the bullied teenager whose talent shocked everyone. Overnight, Jonathan became an international sensation. Yet during the praise, Simon also suggested something controversial. He openly hinted that Jonathan should leave Charlotte behind and pursue a solo career. Imagine hearing that while standing next to your closest musical partner on national television. Despite the awkward moment, the pair continued through the competition, delivering stunning performances of "Caruso" and another unforgettable version of "The Prayer." Standing ovations followed them every step of the way. Most viewers believed they were destined to win. Then the finale arrived, and nobody saw the result coming. Jonathan and Charlotte finished second. The winners were Ashley and Pudsey, a dancing dog act. It became one of the most surprising endings in Britain's Got Talent history. Jonathan later admitted the disappointment hit him hard, but he refused to break down on stage. Looking back, losing may have been the best thing that ever happened to him. Why? Because what happened next changed his career forever. Only a day after the final, Simon Cowell was already negotiating with the duo. They signed a recording contract reportedly worth £1 million with Psycho. They hadn't won the competition, but they had secured an opportunity many winners never received. Their debut album, Together, arrived later that year and climbed into the UK charts. Critics praised Jonathan's rich, warm voice, calling it unique and remarkably mature. Television specials followed. Tours across Europe attracted huge audiences. Simon even apologized publicly for doubting Jonathan during that first audition. It looked like the perfect fairy tale. But behind the scenes, another story was quietly unfolding. Their second album, Perhaps Love, showed subtle signs that things were changing. Both singers recorded solo tracks alongside their duets. Jonathan loved classical opera. Charlotte felt drawn toward musical theater and contemporary songs. Neither dream was wrong. They were simply moving in different directions. For two teenagers suddenly thrown into worldwide fame, balancing those ambitions became increasingly difficult. The question was no longer whether they could sing together. It was whether they could keep building the same future. In February 2014, the answer finally arrived. Jonathan and Charlotte announced they were going their separate ways. Fans were devastated. Together they had sold more than 250,000 albums and inspired a loyal fan community. Both had received solo recording deals with Sony Classical, making the decision feel like the natural next step. Jonathan later explained that neither of them had ever imagined spending an entire career as part of a duo. They had always loved solo performance. As his confidence grew, he realized it was finally time to step out on his own. But even when a decision makes sense, it can still hurt. After the split, Jonathan and Charlotte gradually lost touch. Once inseparable friends became distant as their careers moved in different directions. Rumors spread that they had secretly dated, but both repeatedly denied it. They insisted they had only ever been close friends and musical partners. Fans continued to hope for a reunion, yet life had already taken them down separate paths. The partnership that introduced Jonathan to the world had ended. Now he had to prove he could succeed alone. But to understand why he was ready, you have to go back much further. Jonathan Antoine was born in Hainaut, Essex, in January 1995. Long before television audiences knew his name, he was simply a young boy struggling to fit in. Bullying began when he was only 4 years old. He was mocked because of his weight, his appearance, and the way he carried himself. The cruelty became a constant part of his childhood. Food became a source of comfort. Music became a place where he finally felt safe. Those two habits would shape much of his life. Then someone noticed what everyone else had overlooked. At West Hatch High School, singing coach Jenny Ewington heard something extraordinary in Jonathan's voice. She encouraged him to perform pieces like Where Is Love and Panis Angelicus, helping him discover confidence through music. Slowly, classmates stopped seeing him as just another bullied student. He became the boy with the incredible voice. By 14, he auditioned for London's leading music conservatories and earned offers from all of them. He chose the Royal Academy of Music's junior program. Soon after, he achieved an astonishing score of 98 out of 100 at the Stratford and East London Music Festival, the highest mark in the festival's history. The same boy who had once hidden from attention was now earning it for all the right reasons. But the toughest tests were still waiting. Jonathan's solo career began in 2014 with the album Tenore. The pressure was enormous. Many wondered if audiences would embrace him without Charlotte beside him. They did. The album reached #1 on the Classical Artist Albums chart, making Jonathan the youngest tenor ever to achieve that milestone. It also entered the UK pop charts, proving his appeal reached far beyond opera fans. Soon he was performing alongside legendary tenor Placido Domingo, touring internationally, and appearing at major charity events in America. The teenager once doubted on live television had become one of the brightest young voices in classical music. Yet success doesn't erase old wounds. For years Jonathan quietly battled depression. The bullying he experienced as a child left emotional scars that fame couldn't magically heal. Around the time of his Britain's Got Talent breakthrough, he was diagnosed with acute depression. At one point his mental health forced him to cancel an important performance at the Royal Albert Hall. He also spoke openly about a deeply difficult relationship during his late teens, describing how it added even more emotional strain during an already challenging period. Through everything, his parents and older sister remained his strongest support system. Instead of hiding his struggles, Jonathan chose to speak openly about mental health, hoping his experiences could help others feel less alone. But another revelation would eventually help him understand his own life in a completely different way. In 2022, shortly after turning 27, Jonathan received an autism spectrum diagnosis. 2 years later he shared the news publicly. Suddenly, many pieces of his life seemed to fit together. The social difficulties, the intense focus on music, the feeling of being different for so many years all made more sense. Rather than seeing the diagnosis as a limitation, Jonathan described it as a chance to understand himself more clearly. It gave new meaning to experiences that had confused him for decades. That understanding also inspired another remarkable transformation. Jonathan had struggled with his weight for most of his life. Comfort eating had become deeply connected to the pain he experienced growing up. Around 2018 and 2019, while also managing a thyroid condition, he committed to changing his lifestyle. His approach wasn't based on quick fixes. Instead, he focused on consistency. Walking 10,000 steps every single day became part of his routine. He changed his relationship with food and gradually lost more than 70 pounds, with some reports suggesting the total was even higher. The transformation amazed fans, but Jonathan always emphasized that it wasn't about appearance. It was about feeling healthy, stronger, and more in control of his life for the first time in years. And the changes didn't stop there. Today, Jonathan continues recording music and performing for audiences around the world. His recent releases blend classical training with modern songs, showing just how much he has grown as an artist. He remains passionate about raising awareness for mental health, autism acceptance, and anti-bullying campaigns. Charlotte followed her own path into musical theater, and although the two rarely speak now, both have built successful careers on their own terms. Jonathan's life has never followed the path people expected, but perhaps that's exactly what makes his story so powerful. Looking back, it's easy to focus on the viral audition or the shocking result that saw him lose to a dancing dog. But those moments were only the beginning. The real story is about resilience. It's about a little boy who was bullied before he even understood why. A teenager who stepped onto a stage despite years of insecurity. An artist who rebuilt his life after heartbreak, depression, and uncertainty. A man who finally discovered the answers he had been searching for through an autism diagnosis and a commitment to becoming healthier, both physically and mentally. Every setback became another reason to keep moving forward. Every challenge made his voice even stronger. And that's why Jonathan Antoine's journey isn't really about coming second on a television show. It's about proving that the greatest victories often happen long after the cameras stop rolling.